Emma and I like to have fun and cackle, which is why this is happening. So we're like, what does data have to do with everything? Everything, right? So we live in a world full of data. Google knows what's up. Google finishes my thoughts before I'm having a different thought. I type it into the search box and it actually gives me a better thought. So when that happens, I say, like, we're all thinking, why is education not doing that, right? Why are we in healthcare left behind in industry that's so important? Why aren't we leveraging all this data? And why is it the only thing that we look at our exam results super late, end of game, and matriculation rates, right? And everything else that goes on US News World Report that's so important. And to think about all of this, we really want to say, hey, Jimmy, our favorite lifelong learner. There's no reason why he's named Jimmy, just is. And what does Jimmy's life look like in this non-data leverage, zero insight world of learning that's today? And to tell Jimmy's tale, I'm going to hand off to Emma.
Okay, so as you can see, Jimmy is stumbling around lost in his learning, right? So here's Jimmy, things don't look so good. And the problem is that learning for Jimmy is really challenging, and especially so since everything went online and will probably be online in some way for a while. And so we sort of like to think about it like this. So picture this. So Jimmy's learning, his whole experience is kind of like stumbling around in a massive dark shed, right? And this is true if Jimmy's in school or if he's learning fully online by himself. Because the reality is that no matter how good Jimmy's course is and how great Jimmy's educator is and how good his lectures are, the majority of Jimmy's learning time is asynchronous, right? He's doing most of his learning, his connecting of concepts off on his own, creating notes, creating flashcards, trying to navigate his learning space by himself. Okay, so Jimmy is in a dark shed. The lights are off. The shed is filled with a bunch of content, right? Some of that content is helpful. Some of it's good for Jimmy, but a lot of it is confusing. It's distracting. It's just not the right thing that he needs right then. So as Jimmy, can just picture Jimmy, right? He's fumbling around in the shed. He's trying to look for the right stuff to grasp the right concepts. He's tripping over, old things, which you can imagine is like an out-of-date lecture or a PDF that's just not right anymore. He's getting poked by well-intentioned pitchforks, which in this example are, the really great content that just isn't what Jimmy needs right now. It's so good, but it's not what Jimmy needs, right? Well-intentioned pitchforks. And he's just looking for the right stuff to grasp concepts. And so he's just not getting what he needs to learn. And as he bumps around, he's feeling the walls, he's exploring, he's trying to build a map of his knowledge space in his head, right? So he can get to his objective. But as he's doing that, he doesn't know what he doesn't know. So he misses an entire closet that has a whole bunch of knowledge that he really needs to go and figure out. But he just misses it, he walks right past it, right? Because Jimmy's in the dark and he doesn't know what he doesn't need to know. And so finally he finds a light switch, right? Oh, I'm going to turn that on and I'm going to be able to see everything and go and navigate this dark shed and get to where I need to get to in my learning journey. But it turns out that no one actually wired up Jimmy's shed, right? No one wired it up. And so there isn't going to be any light to illuminate Jimmy's learning journey. And, so Jimmy's still in the dark and he finally finds a door. It's the right door. It's going to contain all the knowledge and concepts and the right content that he needs. He opens that up and he just falls down a well of confusion, distraction, the wrong stuff. Maybe he's on Google. He fell down the Google rabbit hole. And so he's sitting there in the dark, lost, confused, really demotivated, right? And so ultimately, the learners like Jimmy, they usually give up, right? They take a gap year, they go on leave, and maybe they fully drop out. And the worst part about that is that Jimmys of the world don't actually reach their learning goals. And, it turns out that for Jimmy's educators, things also aren't super great, right? Jimmy's educators are also in the dark about what's going on for Jimmy. So, they can hop inside Jimmy's shed, they can hop inside, that learning experience that Jimmy's having, and they can try to help. But the problem is that, when they get in there, it's still dark, right? Jimmy's still wandering around. So they don't know where Jimmy is. Where is Jimmy in his learning journey? Has he made progress? What has he mastered? What has he not? What has he found? And so, is he stuck? Does he have the content that he needs? And so because it's dark, they also can't see all the tools and pitchforks and, old content and good stuff that Jimmy has found yet. So, they go in there and they leave some content trails for Jimmy, hoping that he'll find them and they'll help him in his learning journey. But, turns out Jimmy's off in another room, right? And so they don't actually even know if Jimmy's still in the shed, right? Like Jimmy could have logged off and disengaged a month ago. We don't know if Jimmy's still there. And so, the problem is that if, let's say that Jimmy's educators, they navigate that shed and they find that door that Jimmy found and they find Jimmy in a well, and that's a feat in and of itself. But once they get there, they don't know why Jimmy's in that well, right? They don't know where he got stuck, what confused him. They can't see the ladder, right? Neither of them can see the ladder because it's dark. So how do they get Jimmy out of the well? And oftentimes by the time Jimmys of the world have fallen down the confusion and demotivated learning well, they've already decided that they're going to drop out or take their gap year, right? And probably the hardest part for Jimmy's educators is that Jimmy's not their only student. They have dozens or hundreds of other students just like Jimmy who are trying to navigate their own personal dark shed and need their help. But there's good news, right? So this is a session on data and insights to help educators and learners like Jimmy navigate the learning world. And so we can actually fix all of this. So by leveraging data and the insights that come from it, we can, in this shed example, we can turn the lights on, right? Data and insights let us turn the lights on. They let us see, where is Jimmy? Where is he stuck? How can we help him? What has worked? Why did he fall down the well? There's a ladder. And so we're going to talk more about this over the rest of this session. And to kick it off, as Aisha got us all warmed up and ready for, we're going to do some brainstorming, okay? So want you to, in a second, turn your mics, unmute your mics, right? Get your videos on. So we're going to break out into brainstorming sessions. Each one will be led by a Sophia teammate. So it'll take us a minute to sort of get all sorted out. So just hang out in your breakout rooms and you'll know when we're there. And once we're all there, what we're going to do is try to orient some of our brainstorming around these questions. Okay, so imagine back to the last semester, if you were maybe a Jimmy or you were an educator of Jimmy. Things were probably fully or partially online, right? And if they weren't, that's okay too. Just think back and think about what information, what knowledge about how things were going for you as Jimmy or you as Jimmy's educator, what would have been helpful? Would it have been helpful to know if Jimmy was engaged or if he'd left the shed? Would it have been helpful to know, that the great content that you were putting out there for Jimmy actually wasn't helping because he was off on YouTube? So what kind of stuff would have been helpful to know during the semester so that you as Jimmy could better guide your own learning experience, or as Jimmy's educator, you could help guide Jimmy? What do you wish you'd known at the end of the semester or now to help going into a summer session or the fall? What information do you wish you'd known about how things went last semester to make it better next time? And finally, what information did you have access to that made things like so much better, right? What was that like little gem nugget of knowledge you had that allowed you to help Jimmys of the world or improve your own Jimmy learning? So these are the kind of questions. So we're going to break out now and we'll see you all in a few minutes.
Yeah, and to add on to that, we're going to come back and examine what the world is like for Jimmy when all this data and all these insights are leveraged to help his learning world. So it's going to come back around.
So join your breakout rooms and we'll see you soon.
Well, so brainstorm sessions are lovely. Synthesis is more fun when we wrap everything together. And to be quite frank, Colton is the one who's really good at this from our team. So I'm just going to play second fiddle here for my group and go first. So we had a great chat that really centered around communication has been really hard in terms of data flow, right? So when we don't have a pathway for communicating, how do we even have access to that data? Some folks really brought up the issue of LMSs have tools and data. Some of our platforms have them, but we don't really have a way of seeing the raw data. So there is a bit of a barrier between what we receive and what's actually happening. And that all really came back to just not knowing what materials are being used, especially when everybody was forced into the online world. So no one knew what assistive devices technologies were being used, any course materials being used. There was some chatter about doing weekly check-ins and utilizing some platforms for weekly check-ins as something that's more common and frequent, but not really knowing what's up and what's causing things. And I think one member really mentioned, sometimes what's wrong with the material or the course or someone struggling really has nothing with the course or their study capacities, but actually life happens. And how do you capture when it's life happening? you know, and COVID happens and suddenly you have to take care of your 6 kids and homeschool them and you don't have time to study for something anymore. So that's really what we landed on, having sort of empathy and care and understanding for the student as well. So happy to hand off to Emma or Colty, whoever wants it.
Awesome. Colton, you go for it.
All right. We had some really interesting conversations from two perspectives. The first, I think, Steve, from an IT perspective on how data is collected now. And he flagged a really interesting point about if data input is required from instructors or from others, he's just seen that it goes undone. So it's sort of automated capture of data seems to be something that's like could be very useful here throughout the semester and at the end of it. And pointed us to the Open Learning Initiative, the OLI, which I throw that out there. Most people probably know about this, but I'm definitely going to go in and read more about those deep metrics that he suggested. The second half was from the student's perspective. Renata was so open about sharing, about taking statistics courses online, and a few things that she that brought up that we all kind of were galvanized by was around like just how you communicate within the class. So for instance, giving and providing feedback to something that was good is different if you're in person and saying, yes, that was great, and hitting the clap icon on Zoom. So there's like this qualitative difference. And then someone else chimed in and said that actually in her class online, she and her classmates have a lot of rich discussion on GroupMe, but have very formal discussions on their LMS. So there's this distinction between some of the more richer conversations and where they happen. So the places that they feel that formality and informality can play a role in how they communicate feedback, I think was a really, really cool point that was made there. The last point I will make is the students also said that when they were put online, some of the material from their curriculum was gutted or taken out or pushed to a next semester. And a question that came up is like, what am I not learning because this is online? And what am I missing because of the change in the way that this is delivered? So really interesting perspective from the student side.
That's awesome. Very cool. Okay, well, this is great because I think we all sort of touched on like different things. So it gives us like a really well-rounded set of things to walk away with. So, so we focused on a few things. So the first thing we looked at is under the question of like, what do we wish we knew during the semester? We focused first on the sort of learning side, on the content side. So like a lot of the resources that we put out there as educators, we don't quite know, like, are they being engaged with? There's a huge difference between someone maybe looking at a video on 2 times speed and, you know, while being on Facebook, and a much bigger difference between a learner who's sort of slowing things down and replaying a video or revisiting a resource and really trying to like engage with and get into the material. So not really knowing that, especially online, is really challenging. So we also talked about the difference between like memorization versus grasping a concept. So, you know, if a student is given some learning resources and then we somehow test that, sometimes it can be really challenging to see, like, are they just kind of telling us what they know that they need to tell us to get a good grade or do well, or if they really engaged with and understood and grasped a concept. And that is a really important difference that's really hard to suss out. The other part we talked about was what's going on for the student, right? So what's going on for the student during the semester on that day? And we had like a really cool set of ideas coming out at the end there, where we had people who were sort of gauging how students feel by asking like, what animal or what meme are you today? Which I thought was really cool. And educators that were going out there and seeing what memes and images are flying around the web in the students' world, bringing those into the online classroom and saying, okay, before we get started, like, how are you? Where are you on this range of like sad panda to, you know, happy, you know, meerkat or something? I've just made those up on the fly. But the point there is that there's a real disconnect as we're online with knowing like how are the students doing and knowing that before it's a problem. And so getting a little creative and fun with the Zoom backgrounds and the how are you doing touch points with animals is a way to really like get in there and find that out. And then let me look here. What else did we do? So, right. Then the last piece was like at the during is like, how are you doing? Are you anxious? But at the end, knowing, were you successful? Like, how did this course or this, you know, period of time go for you? And using that information at the end to then being able to adjust later on. So there's a lot of information that we found we wanted in the moment early so we could pivot as we go along. But there was some information we really wanted to know at the end to see, after all this learning, have you actually achieved grasping this concept, or did you get to where you wanted to go? And we also talked about some really cool creative ways to ask the students early, what are your goals or what are you really passionate about right now? And then incorporating that into the learning experience to make it a lot more engaging and personalized for the student. So some really cool conversations there. So
Great. All right. So all of that to say, if we come back to the tale of Jimmy, and someone had said over the Zoom chat earlier, poor Jimmy. Poor Jimmy's right. But we just had this really great 15-minute brainstorm about how Jimmy's life can be a heck of a lot better, right? And I love this meme because it's like, what if I was made for you and you were made for me? And what if this is it? What if it's meant to be? And suddenly I'm being taught in a way that makes sense and works for me. So let's say, in bringing in everything we've talked about, Jimmy really wants to become a super famous burger chef one day, right? That's his ultimate learning goal. I'm just pulling that out of thin air, by the way, because I think I'm hungry. And if that's his goal, so we actually know what he wants to do, which is awesome. There's that line of communication. And then we say, finally, Jimmy kind of understands when he works best, right? Maybe he's really good at coming up with creative flavors between the hours of 5:15 p.m. and 6:23 p.m., but he's really better at learning how you're meant to make old school sauces and recipes from the French style of cooking at 6 a.m. in the morning, because that's when his brain works and he's woken up and caffeinated. Whatever works for him. And at the same time, his educator can see into that and provide him with the right feedback and the right tools to learn at that time. Also, maybe Jimmy learns better from movies instead of from reading a cookbook. And he can finally know, and that right amount of content can find his way to him. And at the same time, there are these little touch points that are possible that wouldn't otherwise be possible if we didn't have any insight into how he's doing, right? We keep on talking about communication pathways and all of that happens. So where does that communication happen, and where does the feedback come in? Is it happening in the restaurant? Is it happening in the kitchen where he's cooking? Or is it happening on the street side when he's having a conversation and walkings, right? That really goes back to a lot of what Colton's group was saying about formal conversations about feedback versus informal ones, and where are we most comfortable? And by the way, it's different for Jimmy and it's different for Sally, and it could be different for the educator, and it's the educator's challenge to meet each individual where they are, and our challenge as providers of platforms to make it easy for the educator to be able to morph to meet the individual student who's learning. And then at the end of the day, what we talked about is how all of these resources, some of them don't get used, and no one needs to waste time on that, right? And it's really easy to spend a lot of time thinking that we know what people need to learn, but when there is this automated loop of information and this feedback that comes through from multiple channels, from Jimmy saying, hey, head chef, I don't really understand what you're doing with your cookbook here. I'm gonna toss it into the fire dumpster bin. It becomes a lot more useful, and then no one's upset about it. So in this world where we leverage everything we just talked about, everyone's happier, which is the ultimate goal. And we've talked a lot about our ideas and the kind of paradise envisioning and how life is easier when everything is custom made and custom fit. And you guys might have some questions. You might be saying, well, how, and can I do this now? And where is everything? Because we keep talking about, we almost have the data we need, but we can't see it enough, or like we can't communicate enough. So we've got a few minutes left, like 2 or 3. And if you have any questions, pop them out to us, put them in the Zoom chat. Otherwise, everything we've talked about now, we will be putting into the Slack, into a couple channels, probably by tomorrow morning, so that you all have access to them. But we want to keep the conversation going. So I'll stop talking and say, please ask us questions.
So this is Steve. Do you have a tool? Are you selling a tool that addresses this? And kind of give us a 30-second overview of how the tool mines its data to report this information.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. That's an awesome question. So these are the things that we tackle at Sophia. So at Sophia, we have a tool, and that tool generally sits alongside an LMS, and it's the place that students actually engage with the content and do their learning. So at a really zoomed out view, the way Sophia works and actually tackles these questions and these problems and gives educators the insights they need is sort of two main sides to Sophia. So on the one side of Sophia is the experience for the students. So the students visit Sophia, and on Sophia, they can use a bunch of really engaging tools that mimic the tools that they really want to use out on their own, right? Great flashcard tools, note-taking tools, really engaging stuff, gamification. And they use all that in Sophia to engage with their curriculum content and also all the content that they learn on their own, all that YouTube learning and other stuff that they do to supplement their curriculum learning. And so what happens is the students then actually bring their learning time into Sophia. And so on the other side of things is the educator side. And so educators get a dashboard inside Sophia where they can see aggregated and per student information about what is really happening in that asynchronous time where students are doing a lot of their learning, right? So are the students engaged with this material? Are they not even utilizing it? Why? What kind of material are they finding useful on their own time, right? It turns out that they're actually not using our material on topic X, and instead they're actually really leveraging these short, not very good videos on YouTube that we might want to, steer them away from. And so the way Sophia really works then is by engaging the student and having it so that they actually spend their learning time on the course material in Sophia, and that allows educators to get some really rich insights to guide the learning journey as we talked about in our discussions.
Hello, I would like to talk offline continue as well. So I'm academic director, Bora Askan, academic director of the online programs at Temple University, Fox School of Business. So we looked into something like this, Zoomy.ai. I mean, they do for corporate trainings, and it was not necessarily, so this was last year, so we couldn't go anywhere because LMS was the biggest missing link. So Canvas, not having access to Canvas makes it almost. My question is a little bit twofold. One of them is, I'm assuming since you work with Canvas or LMS, you have all the data issues like compliance issues, ADA, or the issues we have to deal with as universities are keeping the student identities and things like that. I'm assuming your work with that. The other thing is, how do you deal with things that are outside of the learning management system, like YouTube or the publishers, right? So they have their own textbooks, ebooks, and things like that. Do you also connect with them and collect data on them, or is it just on Canvas or the LMS?
Yeah, those are super awesome questions. So to address your first question about like working with the LMS, compliance data and things like that, basically Sophia locks right into whatever system the school needs us to lock into. So it could be Canvas. Everything is handled in an encrypted format, and students actually they can operate completely off Sophia using an alias, and the schools can be the only ones that have information on who the student is and what their contact information is. So to operate Sophia, there actually doesn't need to be any personal information on our end, and everything can just be handled by plugging into existing tools. But Sophia also can operate on its own. So we're flexible in that sense. But privacy is obviously the #1 concern. And Sophia actually started as a student-first tool because having students be really engaged it's really important to have students be engaged in their learning environment for us to not sort of lose them off to the internet. And so privacy, things like that all can be handled, and we can completely talk offline just about some of the nuances with anything that you use and how we can work with that. Can you remind me, your second question was about?
The non LMS resources like Publisher or YouTube or other videos.
Yeah, such a great question, because like the whole point is like, what are they doing outside of the curriculum learning? How does Sophia address that? So what Sophia does not do is sort of follow students around and capture data on what they're doing outside of the LMS. We don't do that. So there's no tracking, there's nothing like that. That's a common question. What we actually do is we take the stance of, if we create tools that students really love to engage with their learning material, they will spend their learning time with us. And so That's what we've seen so far. So basically the space that the students have has a bunch of tools that they love. And outside of their curriculum material, you can think of it almost as like a notebook. The student has access to an entire notebook, and only some of those pages are curriculum resources. But in their notebook, they also have all of their own personal space where they can link in, or if they own it, they can upload their own stuff. And they're incentivized to do that because the tools that we provide are super, super engaging. And so what that means is we can de-identify that information and provide it to schools in an aggregate way that basically is just for informative purposes. So we don't need to tell you what Sally is doing on YouTube, but what is really helpful for you is, on average, your students are tending to watch a lot of videos on YouTube, right, for this particular concept. And so perhaps there's something really beneficial there for you to go and look at. And so in terms of the privacy and things like that, that's handled because it's completely abstracted away from the learner, or general insights that can guide what's going on for the students outside the curriculum.